A man walked into church during the holiest moment and tried to stop everything because he discovered something that shattered his entire life. What he said next made the priest sit down and listen, and changed what the entire community believed about faith forever. The church was quiet except for the sound of rain hitting the tall windows. 200 people sat in wooden pews with their eyes closed. The candles on the altar burned steady and orange. Outside Dublin was grey and wet, but inside St. Catherine's everything felt warm and safe. Father Michael stood at the front, wearing white robes that went down to his shoes. He was 62 years old and had been a priest for 35 years. His hands moved carefully as he held up a thin piece of bread. This was the moment his church believed was the most sacred moment of the entire week. He spoke words in a quiet voice that had been spoken the same way for hundreds of years. "This is my body, given for you," Father Michael said. His voice echoed off the stone walls. "Do this in remembrance of me." Everyone answered together. 200 voices said Amen at the same time. The word hung in the air like something real, something you could almost touch. Candlelight made shadows dance across the stone floor. The colored windows threw blue and red and gold light across the people's faces. Everyone felt the same thing in that moment, the feeling that something important was happening, something much bigger than just bread and wine. Then the doors crashed open. Rain and wind came rushing in. A man stood in the doorway, soaking wet. His clothes dripped water onto the marble floor. His hair was stuck to his forehead. His eyes looked wild and scared and angry all at the same time. His name was Thomas, and he was breathing so hard it sounded like he had been running very far. "Stop!" he shouted. His voice was so loud it made some people jump. A woman near the back dropped her prayer book. A little boy grabbed his mother's arm. "This has to stop. This is wrong." Father Michael did not move. He still held the bread up high, but his face changed. His eyes got soft instead of scared. "You are doing magic," Thomas yelled. He walked forward and his wet shoes left dark marks on the clean floor. "You are lying to these people. The bread does not really change. You know it does not change, but you tell them it does anyway." Two men who worked as helpers at the church she stood up fast. One was named Kevin, and he was 70 years old. The other man was younger, maybe 40. They moved toward Thomas to stop him from going closer to the altar, but Thomas put his hands up to show he was not going to hurt anyone. "I am not here to cause trouble," Thomas said. His voice shook a little. "I am here because I used to believe exactly what all of you believe. I was an altar boy like the young boys here. I almost became a priest myself, but then I found out something. I found out that everything I believed was not real. It was built to make people listen to the church. It was built for power." The church was completely silent now, except for the rain outside. Even the candles seemed quieter, even though candles do not make sound. Father Michael slowly lowered his hands. He looked at the bread in his palm. He looked at Thomas. "What is your name?" the priest asked. "My name is Thomas," the man said. "And I lost everything I believed when I learned the truth about this place." The church was different now. Most people had stopped singing. Some families had left. They did not want to sit through more trouble. About 150 people stayed in their seats. They were not sure if they should stay or go. Thomas sat in a pew near the back where the helpers could watch him. His wet clothes made a dark mark on the wooden seat. Father Michael walked over slowly and sat down next to him. Kevin and the other helper stood nearby, not sure what to do. "Thomas," Father Michael said quietly, "I want to know what brought you here today. Will you tell me what happened? Thomas took a long breath. The anger in his face melted into something sadder. I have spent 3 years reading books that the church does not want people to read, he said. I studied in secret. I learned that the bread does not really turn into flesh. That is a story the church made up 800 years ago. Before that, people just remembered Jesus. They did not think the bread actually changed into his body. A woman in the middle of the church stood up fast. She was about 50 years old, and her face was red. "This is not respectful," she shouted. "We came here to pray, not to listen to someone tell lies about our faith." Other people made sounds of agreement. Some people nodded. Others crossed their arms over their chest. The church that had been calm just minutes before now felt tense and divided. Father Michael raised his hand to ask everyone to be quiet. "Please," the priest said, "everyone should be heard. Thomas came here with strong feelings. We need to understand why." Thomas's shoulders fell. He looked very tired. "My daughter asked me questions last year," he said. "She asked me why we think bread becomes flesh. I gave her answers that I had heard all my life, but I could not explain why these things were true. So I started to read and learn. I read book after book." Kevin spoke from where he was standing. He sounded kind, not angry. "What did you find when you read all those books?" "I found," Thomas said slowly, "that I have spent 40 years teaching my children to believe something that I cannot prove is true. The more I read, the more I understood that the whole church is built on stories, not on facts. The bread does not really change. The Pope is not really perfect. The priests do not really have special power from God. It is all stories told long ago to make people do what the church wanted them to do." An old priest named Father Dermot stood up from his seat. He was 80 years old and very thin. "You are wrong," he said. "Faith is not about chemicals. It is about something you cannot measure with science. When I pray with the bread, I feel God. I feel something real, even if science cannot see it." "But that is exactly the problem," Thomas said. His voice got louder again. "You can say anything is spiritual. You can make anything sound deep and true by calling it a mystery, but if nothing can be tested, how is it different from a story you tell yourself?" More people started talking at once. Some people agreed with Thomas. They nodded and whispered to each other. Other people held their faith tight like a blanket. They did not want to hear what he was saying. Their faces closed up. Father Michael stood up. He tried to make everything calm again. "These questions are not new," he said. "People have asked them for many years. But people who ask them leave," Thomas said. He pointed at the priest. "And people who stay are told not to ask questions. I came here today because I cannot stay quiet. I cannot pretend anymore." Father Michael looked at the altar. The bread sat there alone and waiting. He looked back at Thomas. "Then stay," the priest said. "Stay and talk with us about these questions." The church basement was bright and cold. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. It was afternoon now, and 12 hours had passed since Thomas crashed through the doors. A simple table held tea and biscuits. 6 people sat around it. Father Michael was there. Father Dermot was there. Kevin was there. Thomas was there. 2 other people had come to listen. One was Margaret, a woman who had taught about religion for 30 years. The other was David, a man who was 35 years old and worked as a nurse. David had not come to church for 8 years, but he came today because his daughter asked him to. "I taught religion classes for 30 years, Margaret said. She held her teacup with both hands. "Thomas, your questions are not wrong. I tell my students to ask hard questions. But asking questions and stopping the church service are 2 different things." "I did not plan to do this," Thomas said. His voice was calm now. I came to the service because families come at that time. I needed to say something. I needed to tell people it is okay to have doubts. My daughter thinks that believing in God means you cannot think. David spoke for the first time. His voice was soft. That is why I am here, he said. My daughter asked me why I stopped coming to church. I did not have a good answer, so I came back today. And then you ran in. Father Dermot leaned forward. You think faith has to make sense, like science makes sense, but faith works differently. Faith is about trusting something bigger than yourself. Is it wrong to want beliefs that are real? Thomas asked. Is it wrong to want the truth? Father Michael poured more tea. That is the real question. What do we mean by real? A scientist says real is something you can measure. A person who prays says real is something you feel in your heart. Margaret nodded slowly. I have had students leave faith because they could not believe in miracles. I have had other students grow stronger in faith because they accepted mystery. Both kinds are real people with real feelings. But you cannot build a church on mystery, Thomas said. He set down his cup. The church built itself on certainty. It said the Pope was perfect. It said priests had special power. It said the bread really changed. If it is all mystery, then why should anyone believe the Catholic Church instead of any other church? Kevin was very old and very quiet, but now he spoke. Because community matters, Thomas. Maybe the bread does not really change. Maybe all the old rules do not matter the same way. But we come together. We remember that Jesus died for us. We promise to be good to each other. Maybe that is enough. David nodded. He had tears on his face now. But for someone like me who left, I need to know the church is honest. I can believe in mystery. I cannot believe in a lie. The room went quiet. Everyone understood that David had said something true. Father Michael looked at Thomas carefully. Will you stay with us? Will you come to the meetings where we talk about these hard questions? Your coming here was wrong, but your questions need a real answer, not just an angry answer. Thomas's hard face softened. His eyes got wet. I thought you would throw me out. I thought you would be angry. I do not know what to do with someone who listens to me. The same church looked very different now. It was 6 months later. It was evening on a Thursday. About 100 people sat in the pews. Some were people who came every Sunday. Some were people who had not come to church in years. Some were people who had never come to church before. Thomas sat on a stage at the front with Father Michael and Father Dermot and Margaret and a woman from the university who studied religion. Father Michael stood to speak. We are here because Thomas Byrne asked questions that we did not answer well, he said. He came in the wrong way, but his questions were right. So we made a place to talk about these things together. Thomas stood up. He was different now, not angry, not sad, just thoughtful. 6 months ago, I was sure I was right and everyone else was wrong, he said. I thought I had to make people see the truth. I was so sure of myself that I did not care if I hurt people. He paused and looked at the crowd. But something happened, Thomas said. Instead of fighting with me, Father Michael talked with me. I came to the meetings, I read things, and I understood something new. My doubts did not destroy my faith. My doubts made my faith real. People in the seats nodded. Some smiled. I still have questions about the bread, Thomas said. I do not think it really becomes flesh, but I understand now what the church was trying to do. When I take the bread, I am not thinking about science. I am joining with thousands of years of people who believed in Jesus. I am part of something that is much bigger than myself. Margaret spoke next. The church changed its understanding over time. Mystery does not mean lies. Mystery means something so big that our small words cannot contain it. Kevin stood up from his seat. His voice shook a little. My wife died 4 years ago, he said. At her funeral, the bread and wine meant more to me than any explanation ever could. Thomas, I am glad you stayed. I am glad you kept asking questions. Now, when my grandchildren ask me why we do this, I have better answers to give them. David also stood. He had tears on his face again, but they were happy tears now. My daughter and I come to church now, he said. We do not pretend to understand everything, but we are here together, and that is what matters. Father Dermot looked right at Thomas. You came to destroy, the old priest said, but you stayed to build. That is grace. The whole room started clapping. Thomas did not look proud. He looked moved and humble. Father Michael walked to the front again. We have learned that a church needs two kinds of people. We need people who keep the old ways alive. We need people who ask hard questions. Thomas reminded us that faith without honest thinking becomes weak. Thomas sat down next to Margaret. She put her hand on his shoulder for just a moment. Tonight, Father Michael said, we show that people can disagree and still listen to each other. We show that doubt does not kill faith. Doubt can make faith stronger. Thomas came here to shake our church. Instead, he helped us grow. The room became silent. Not the silence of fear like at the beginning. This was a different silence. This was the silence of a community that had been broken and then mended back together in a stronger way. Father Michael looked at everyone. When you go home tonight, ask yourself this question. What beliefs do I hold that I have never really questioned? And what would happen if I was brave enough to ask the hard questions about the things I believe?